The International Center for Underwater Archaeology in Zadar is pleased to share with you a presentation on the occasion of the 20th anniversary of the UNESCO Convention on the Protection of the Underwater Cultural Heritage. The presentation is prepared by the following representatives of the Center: Doris Kurtov from the International Cooperation and Funding Department, Mladen Pešić, the Director, Roko Surić from the Underwater Heritage Presentation Department, and Anita Jelić from the Restoration and Conservation Department. In her lecture, Doris Kurtov will tell us more about the 20th anniversary of the Convention of the Protection of the Underwater Cultural Heritage. Mladen Pešić will talk about the protection of underwater cultural heritage in Croatia and its challenges. Roko Surić will present us the recent methods in underwater archaeological site documentation in Croatia, and Anita Jelić will talk about the reconservation of the early Croatian ships from NIT.
I'm Doris Kurtov from the International Cooperation and Funding Department, and I'm pleased to share with you a presentation on the UNESCO Convention on the Protection of the Underwater Cultural Heritage. This type of heritage is composed of all traces of human existence that have a cultural, historical, or archaeological character that have been partially or totally underwater for at least 100 years. But let me start by saying a few words about the center. The International Center for Underwater Archaeology in Zadar is established by the Croatian government to contribute to the achievement of UNESCO's objectives at regional or international level. In 2008, an agreement was signed between the UNESCO and the government of the Republic of Croatia regarding the establishment of the International Center in Zadar as a Category 2 center under the auspices of UNESCO. In 2016, a renewal agreement was signed. This year, our focus is on the renewal evaluation and hopefully the new agreement in 2023. International Center for Underwater Archaeology in Zadar is the only Category 2 center in UNESCO culture sector, the field of underwater archaeology. One of its core objectives is to strongly promote the 2001 Convention and its implementation in the European Union, Southeast Europe, and other UNESCO member states. And how is it accomplished? Well, it is accomplished in conducting all educational activities in the field of underwater archaeology and conservation of underwater findings. Now, let us look what is the 2001 Convention and what is the overall goal. 2001 Convention is the international agreement particularly dedicated to the protection of underwater cultural heritage. It was adopted on November 6, 2001 in Paris at the 31st General Conference of UNESCO. And it was signed by the Director General of the UNESCO at that time, Mr. Koichiro Matsura, at 6 recognized UNESCO languages. As a matter of fact, it is the only UNESCO convention not to have been adopted unanimously. Nevertheless, it entered into force in 2009. There are two parts, the main text and the annex. Main text comprises 35 articles, together with 36 rules in the annex. The objectives and general principles of the Convention are referred to in the preamble. Rules provide important guidelines for heritage management, but they are often not followed. The rules are highly useful and widely recognized. Every professional working in the field of underwater cultural heritage should strictly comply with these rules. Let's continue. 2001 Convention is independent of any other treaty. What does it mean? Well, it means that states may become party to the Convention regardless of whether they are already state party to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea or other international agreement or not. It stands as lex specialis, while the United Nations Law of the Sea Convention, signed in 1982 in Montego Bay, Jamaica, remains the recognized lex generalis for the whole of the law of the sea and all issues pertaining to it. It's not intended to amend the regulation of the Law of the Sea Convention or other international law. So, to conclude, Law of the Sea Convention is a global treaty on jurisdiction at sea, while 2001 Convention is the first comprehensive international instrument dealing with underwater cultural heritage. Convention has four main principles. The first one is the obligation to preserve underwater cultural heritage. Second, in situ preservation as first option. What does it mean in situ? It means in its original location on the seafloor. This should be considered as the first option before allowing or engaging in any further activities. The next principle is no commercial exploitation, and finally, training and information sharing. 2001 Convention admits that underwater cultural heritage to be of public interest that has unique value for humanity. It shouldn't be treated as an economic or natural resource in the seabed. Each state party to the 2001 Convention has the obligation to share underwater cultural heritage information with other state parties concerning the underwater cultural heritage. It's stated in the Article 19 that include discovery of heritage, its location, underwater cultural heritage excavation, or underwater cultural heritage recovery contrary to this convention. The Secretariat of the 2001 Convention suggests that state parties submit to it national underwater cultural heritage information to establish a worldwide database. State parties are also able to disseminate underwater cultural heritage information to other appropriate regional and international databases. 2001 Convention defines underwater cultural heritage as all traces of human existence having a cultural, historical, or archaeological character which have been partially or totally underwater, periodically or continuously, for at least 100 years. Not everything that is a trace of human existence is necessarily underwater cultural heritage. Only those traces whose character is cultural, historical, or archaeological. 100 years after its sinking, the wreck of the Royal Mail ship Titanic fell under the UNESCO 2001 Convention. This means that all parties to the UNESCO 2001 Convention will prohibit commercial exploitation and provide an international cooperation system for Titanic scientific and archaeological research for the benefit of humanity. Let's continue. The Convention harmonizes the protection of underwater cultural heritage with that of cultural heritage on land. It guarantees cooperation among states and also among scientists worldwide, and it promotes underwater archaeology and sets a high standard for archaeological research. The Convention has two statutory bodies. They are the meeting of the state parties and the Scientific and Technical Advisory Body, or so to say, STEB. The meeting of the state parties gathers the representatives of its state parties. The Director General of the UNESCO convenes the meeting of the state parties at least once every 2 years, if necessary in extraordinary session. The STEB is composed of 12 experts nominated by state parties. The STEB assists state parties in questions of a scientific or technical nature and meets yearly. In 2012, UNESCO established a university twinning network of underwater archaeology. The network aims to increase capacity in the participating countries through international cooperation. International Center for Underwater Archaeology in Zadar has been a member of the UNITWIN network since 2018, meaning that it has status of recognized partner. There are 193 UNESCO member states and 11 associated members. To date, 71 countries ratified the 2001 Convention. By joining the Convention, the state commits to be legally bound by it. UNESCO 2001 Convention is ratified by the deposition of a ratification instrument, letter, with the UNESCO Director General. International harmonization of national law with the Convention is usually required. Let's see the situation in Croatia. Well, the Croatia was the third country to ratify the Convention on the 1st December 2004, which illustrates the importance attributed to the protection of underwater cultural objects. Our main legislation act is the Act on the Protection and Preservation of Cultural Goods, adopted in 1999. According to this act, protection of underwater cultural objects has stricter time criterion than 2001 Convention. What does it mean? Well, it means that the shipwrecks from the First World War and those from the Second World War entered in the Register of Cultural Property of the Republic of Croatia. It has to be said that all Adriatic coastal states ratified the Convention. Montenegro and Slovenia in 2008, Albania and Bosnia and Herzegovina in 2009, and Italy in 2010. Several countries which have pioneered underwater archaeology, such as the United States of America, UK, Canada, India, China, and Australia, haven't not yet ratified the Convention. That is why UNESCO decided to establish a register of best practices for the safeguarding of underwater cultural heritage. It happened on the 5th meeting of the state parties to the 2001 Convention in 2015. There were two main reasons. The first one, to provide an inventory of good examples, and simply to encourage other countries to join the Convention. Countries are invited to provide best practice examples for projects that ensure the lasting protection of underwater archaeological sites or remains, to be evaluated by STEP and eventually inscribed in the register. The designation is possible, among other conditions, if a special and outstanding effort has been made to make the site accessible to the public. There are 12 examples of best practices. Let's see them. Here's a world map taken from the UNESCO website and showing the examples of best practices of underwater cultural heritage. As you can see from the map, France has got one example of best practice of underwater cultural heritage, Mexico 3, Portugal 2, Slovenia 1, and Spain 5. On this slide, you can see different publications. The UNESCO website contains a selection of the most relevant publications on underwater cultural heritage, such as Manual for Activities Directed at Underwater Cultural Heritage, UNESCO Information Brochure on the 2001 Convention, Information Kit, and many others. On the right side here you can see International Center for Underwater Archaeology website with our publications as well. And to conclude, International Center for Underwater Archaeology is the Category 2 center. It works under the auspices of UNESCO and supports the implementation of the 2001 Convention in Southeast European region. In 2020, the Center joined the International Protection of the Skirky Bank site in the Mediterranean basin. Skirky banks are located in the area of relatively shallow open sea situated in the central Mediterranean in the Strait of Sicily, between Sicily and Tunisia, and it was an important trade route in antiquity. The coordination committee is composed of state parties: Algeria, Croatia, Egypt, France, Italy, Morocco, Spain, and Tunisia as coordinating state. These states have expressed their interest in being consulted on ways to ensure the effective protection in the framework of the States Cooperation Mechanism established in accordance with the 2001 Convention. In June this year, the International Center for Underwater Archaeology in Zadar hosted the first meeting of the Underwater Archaeology Task Team. It was the Center's initiative to create a network of underwater archaeologists from Central and Southeast Europe, aiming to provide expertise, skill, and knowledge. The meeting was attended by participants from 16 countries and was also held virtually due to the epidemiological situation. Creation of databases is agreed and highly welcomed. As a general principle, cooperative activities will be carried out through joint workshops and research projects along with other activities. The main focus is on the legacy of 2001 Convention. And this leads us to the question, how to improve the safeguarding of underwater cultural heritage. Care for heritage in national and international frameworks is certainly one of the most promising ideas that emerged in the last century. So, what do we need to do? We need to strengthen educational capacities in the field of underwater heritage. We need to increase allocations for underwater archaeological research and acquisition of technical equipment. We need to encourage intergovernmental meetings and regional trainings, as well as to strengthen interministerial meetings to raise the awareness of other competent institutions about the extent and nature of underwater cultural heritage. We need to change the public perception of underwater cultural heritage to make it known and appreciated as that what it is, a unique legacy of humanity. And finally, I'd like to say that all underwater photos in this presentation belong to Center's archives and they were taken during various campaigns. With this, I would like to finish this presentation.
Hello, my name is Mladen Pešić and I will present you protection of underwater cultural heritage in Croatia and challenges. Croatia is a Mediterranean country that has territorial sea of more than 31,000 square kilometers. In our sea there are 1,244 islands, islets, rocks and reefs. Coastal border is 1,778 kilometers, but if we include islands, it is more than 6,100 kilometers. During history, many sailors were using Eastern Adriatic coast for sailing on the Adriatic Sea. Safe ports was one of the main conditions why they used our Eastern Adriatic coast, because there were nice and lots of places to hide during bad weather. Sea currents also helped sailing because their movements from south to north helped boats to sail. Again, favorable winds was one of the main reasons why they used our coast, and these winds were blowing during different times of the year. For them, unfortunately, these winds in certain periods of the year were so strong and hard that they caused the problems. Even today, as we can see on the pictures, they cause the problems for the sailor, but also for the people living by the sea. Eastern Adriatic coast has always been part of maritime transportation route connected with the rest of the Mediterranean. We have evidences from early Neolithic period that seafaring was active on several islands that are in the Adriatic. Import of Daunian and Attic pottery from Italy during 8th to 5th century also gives us proofs that sailing was vivid in this time of the history. During Greek colonization, we have many colonies on the islands in southern part of Croatia that date to 4th and 3rd century BC that also gives us proof that sailing was really active in Adriatic coast. During the 3rd century and 2nd century BC, we have transportation of Greco-Italian amphoras that we found on several sites in Croatia. Of course, during Roman period, from 2nd century BC to 1st century AD, these sailing conditions or sailing through Adriatic was much more vivid than in prehistoric periods. All of this affected the beginnings of underwater research in Croatia for the underwater archaeologists. During 1960s, it became evident that underwater archaeological sites were very much threatened by robbery and devastation, and it was necessary to adopt proper legislation in order to protect underwater cultural heritage. Based on the possibilities then present, the obligation to research and protect these sites was undertaken by research teams operating in different towns in Pula, Rijeka, Split, Šibenik, Zadar and Zagreb in the frame of their institutions. We can see in the pictures several processes of documentation that started really early during 1960s in Croatian underwater archaeology. From the 1990s, Ministry of Culture and Media is in charge of the managing and funding of the underwater research and protection of cultural heritage in Croatia. Different institutions under the Ministry of Culture conduct research and protection. One of them, Croatian Conservation Institute, is situated in Zagreb. Others are in different museums in Zadar, Pula, Split, Dubrovnik, Šibenik, or smaller museums in Umag, Hvar, or Lošinj. There is also University of Zadar, which conducts underwater archaeological research, and of course our institute and the International Center for Underwater Archaeology in Zadar. Legal acts were adapted parallel to the development of protection and research methods that regulated underwater activities in Croatia. And in 2004, Croatia was the third country to ratify the UNESCO 2001 Convention on the Protection of the Underwater Cultural Heritage. We can just mention few of the interesting finds in Croatia, in Croatian underwater archaeology, that affected the development of this branch of archaeology. One of them was two ships, Condura Croatica, that were dated to the 11th and 12th century, found during end of the 60s in Nin Laguna near Zadar. Now they are reconstructed and possible to be seen in Nin Museum of Antiquities. A Gnalic shipwreck that was also excavated during 70s and again during the last years. It is a shipwreck from 16th centuries with many nice finds that consist part of the exhibition in Beograd Museum. One of the key finds in Adriatic was Apoxiomenos, a bronze statue found near Lošinj from 2nd century BC. Also in Lošinj, it is possible to see it exhibited in a museum that was built especially for this find. Researchers conducted by different institutions are yearly developed in Croatia, and we can mention just few of them that are done by International Center for Underwater Archaeology in Zadar. Few shipwrecks that can be excavated gave nice results. For example, Babuljaš is Roman shipwreck from 5th century AD, consisted of different material from North Africa. Uljeva, several shipwrecks on Cape Uljeva that are dated from the 1st century BC to 17th century AD. Veruda shipwreck from 16th century AD that was discovered near Pula. Of course, there are different survey of the different sites, which gives many interesting results, and it's hard to mention them all in one place. Not only in sea waters, but International Center of Underwater Archaeology is dealing with the lakes and rivers, and also excavations in these parts of the Croatia. We can mention just a bridge from the period of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent that was found in Darda, north of Osijek. As we said, parallel to the archaeological excavations and documentation, Croatian laws and regulations concerning activities directed at underwater cultural heritage was adopted. The main law is the law on the protection and preservation of cultural properties that includes list of protected cultural properties, list of cultural properties of national significance, and list of preventive protected cultural property. Several other laws are dealing with the underwater cultural heritage, and of course several regulations that are dealing on archaeological research and regulations for the performing of underwater activities. One of the interesting regulations that are dealing with underwater cultural heritage are regulations on the procedures and methods of issuing permits for underwater activities in islands, in inland sea waters and the territorial sea of Republic of Croatia from 2000 that is dealing with different laws, different regulations that have to be obeyed during visiting underwater cultural sites. Of course, 2001 convention is adopted by Croatia and it is implemented similarly and connected with these laws of protection. According to the law of preservation and protection of cultural heritage, goods for which is presumed that have the characteristics of cultural heritage, whether it is found on land, sea or water, are owned by the Republic of Croatia. Today, there are more than 600 registered underwater sites in Croatia. Diving in registered sites is protected sites and areas is regulated by the special regulations, and it is forbidden to dive on them without license of the Ministry of Culture and Media. At the moment, 184 sites and areas are permanently protected in the Register of Cultural Goods of the Republic of Croatia. There are 34 sites or areas in Croatia where diving is regulated by permissions, prohibitions and obligations for the concessionaires. And on these sites it is possible to dive with special leadership of the diving clubs that have concession. These protected areas with tourist access are different. So we can just mention a few of them here. Baron Gauch is one of the most famous ships that sank during 1918 and many visitors come and visit it. St. Istvan is a little bit deeper site, so only few divers that dive up to depths more than 50 meters can approach it. But there are some other sites that are much better and much easier approachable by the divers. For example, one of the newly discovered shipwrecks with the Lamboya II amphoras from 2nd century BC. Or different boats that are different ships and boats that are protected by the Ministry of Culture because of their historical value. On these sites, it is only permitted to dive with the diving club who has concession and it has obligation to protect the site. One of the specifics in Croatia are the sites that are protected with metal cages. They were implemented since 1990s and today we have 8 sites that are protected in this way. These sites should be protected in a safe way with cages, but as we will see afterwards, there are some issues that are in new developments that are making problems, let's say, with the protection of these sites. They are relatively expensive to be set, but they have a certain level of self-sustaining because diving clubs that are taking you to the site have to pay concession to the state, but divers have to pay the certain amount of rent for the dives to be done in these sites. As we said, many challenges are facing in front of us. Although 2001 convention was set as a law in Croatia according to the other laws, it is not always certain that these sites or the cultural heritage is protected. Few challenges that we can mention are here very important. One of them is the human factor. Even today it is possible to see different cultural heritage in many restaurants and many places, and it is not legal in Croatia to expose this cultural heritage without permission of the Ministry of Culture. In some private collections it is possible to be registered, and then it is nice and legal to present this cultural heritage in different ways. But unfortunately, this is not a rule. This is not a regulation that every person in Croatia has to obey. Even today, we have evidences of illegal trafficking of the, especially amphoras, which are one of the visual keystones of the underwater cultural heritage. It is possible to see even in advertisement that people are selling cultural heritage, even though it is forbidden by the law, and it is punishable by even by the penalty of the jail sentence. But in some cases, these looters are taken by the police, and still there are evidences that they are trying to sell this in a, let's say, a way that they are not hiding themselves. The last years we have been seeing the evidences of even stronger looting of the sites in underwater. One of them, Vlaška Mala shipwreck, was presented to the tourists and wider population, and it was protected by the metal cage. Unfortunately, because of the remote position, no diving clubs did have concession on the site, and there was no temporarily, let's say, protection on the site except the metal cages. Few years ago, we saw that some disturbances happened on the site, and we managed to go and to see the site and to document it. Site is really nice. It consisted around 100 amphoras that were protected by the cage. They are dated to the 2nd century BC. Unfortunately, after the first documentation that was done during 2000s, today we established, and by making the photo model of the site, we established that many amphoras were stolen. That means that somebody broke inside of the metal cage that was supposed to protect the amphoras and took more than 444 amphoras from the site. Now, unfortunately, the site is damaged, and in the future we have to think about the challenges in ways how to protect cultural heritage, not only by law or by the convention, but also by practical ways of monitoring and documenting the sites. Thank you for your attention, and this was just a short review of problems and challenges in Croatia during history. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, my name is Roko Suric and I work in the Underwater Heritage Presentation Department in International Center for Underwater Archaeology in Zadar. And in this presentation I will try to explain some of the recent methods in underwater archaeological site documentation in Croatia. So why is documentation important? Well, there is a saying that research and reconstructions are contribution and recording is a debt. So archaeology is a destructive science, and once we disturb a site, it can never go back to the original situation. Knowing this, you can imagine how important is the proper documentation of every site. Well, the proper site documentation is required to prevent the unnecessary loss of information. So the quality level of archaeological excavation is defined by the quality level of documentation that was used in the process. Previous documentation preserves the information, so you can use it later in the future researches. It also helps to present the discoveries to the public, because knowing each information about the site helps us to investigate the story of the same site. Well, before we continue, we have to say something about the beginnings of documentation in Croatia, in underwater archaeology in Croatia. So, in the beginnings, archaeologists, we are happy that they recognize the importance of a good documentation. On this slide, you can see the different methods that they were using to acquire good documentations. Like this measuring, you can see it here, or they also use some techniques to make photographic documentations of the site. ICWA Zadar was founded in 2007, and in 2009 an international agreement was signed between the Republic of Croatia and UNESCO. So the center became the UNESCO second category center, and it became the only center in the whole world, the UNESCO second category center in the whole world that is dealing with underwater heritage. In the part of the International Center for Underwater Archaeology is its education and documentation department, and the task for that department is organizing education in underwater archaeology, research of underwater sites, and one of the most important things is site documentation and continual improvement of methods. So this department is constantly searching for new methods to document the site. There are two main approaches in the site documentations, and those are analog and digital methods. In the next part of this presentation, you will have an insight in some of the sites in Croatia, and you will see why some of the methods were used on some particular sites. The first one is Veruda shipwreck in Pula. Pula is a city in Istria Peninsula in northern Adriatic, in northern part of Croatian Adriatic. And the shipwreck was discovered by International Center for Underwater Archaeology in Zadar in 2013, and it was recognized by a large ballast pile of rounded stones. So the surrounding stones is limestone, and this ballast pile is consisted of mostly rounded stones that are sticking out from the surroundings. When the archaeologists investigated the pile, they discovered that underneath the stones there are remains of wooden ship construction and also different types of metal findings. So the excavation was conducted, the first excavation was conducted in 2016, and then we discovered that it is a post-medieval shipwreck, and it was excavated and documented together with RGK Frankfurt in Germany with the special financial support of Honor Frost Foundation. Important thing to say here is that the documentation and excavation were parallel. So we had to be fast because it was really shallow waters. So we had to think about the best method of fast documentation and fast excavation in the same time on the site. For this opportunity, we decided that it would be the best to build some kind of a construction. So RGK Frankfurt, for this purpose, they made a special let's say device or installation that you can place on the site, and together with it you will have an easier documentation and faster and more precise documentation of the site. It is aluminum frame that is placed on the rails. You can see the rails here on each side of the site. So you can see the ballast stones here, and the installation would slide over the site. You will see later why is it important for it to be mobile. The installation was placed on the site and it was used for documentation of the site. One diver was floating above the installation, while in the same time another diver was excavating, you can see him here, excavating on the site. Well, you can see here the plan. So with the installation, it was easy to get the x-axis and y-axis, and the diver on top of the installation could easily get the z-axis. So we would know the exact position of every found on the site. So we would not disturb the person who is excavating, and the person who is dealing with documentation could do it really fast in the same time. Well, the majority of the finds are made of metal, so we also had to deal with that, and most of the finds are metal because the ship cargo was partially melted objects and semi-products and ingots. So basically the ship was ransoming and buying products that are metal for later use. And also we found elements of the ship structure, and some of the finds were ceramic, pottery shreds, but most of them were just parts of the ship ballast. The second part of documentation, so you saw the analog documentation, and this is the digital documentation. We used the photogrammetry documentation for this site. It was easy to do it because of the installation that you already saw. The diver would install and place its camera on the frame together with this sliding part of the installation. He would then make filming of the site, and later he could easily make a photographic model of that particular area. Tomorrow, when we excavate a different part, he will make another filming of the same of that area, and then another one, and then another one. So it was easy to document the site. One more thing: why is it important to have a camera in the same position? Is because it's easy to deal with the post process dealing with the photo informations. For example, here you can see the color. The color was a problem because we needed to get the most accurate color of the site. So if you are trying to get the accurate site and if you are trying to get the accurate color, then you need to have the camera at the same position. Otherwise, you will have a different color for different parts of your site. And since the photographs were taken on the same level from the site, it was easy to get the same color information on the post-processing of the photos. And in the final model, we had a unified and nice-looking color of the model. You can see here when we made a sketch. First on the site, we made a sketch of the site of the wooden pieces. Later, we interpreted them also throughout the model, 3D model of the site. We combined it, and then we get the perfect sketch, a perfect plan of the site. And a little bit about the history of the site. You can see here this ship presents the Veruda shipwreck, and you can see this funny looking guy. He's Uskok. Uskoks are pirates from let's say post-medieval Croatian times, and they were attacking basically anyone who had the goods in those times. And in one of their campaigns, they sailed all the way to Rovinj to sack the city of Rovinj. And on the way back from sacking the city, they also attacked one of the ships. And the ship is the exactly one that we have been excavating in Veruda. Another example is Sestrica shipwreck near Rovinj. It's also in Istria. It's a shipwreck in a shallow water, and the ship is dated to the second half of the first and the first half of the 2nd century AD. What are the site characteristics? The finds are spread on a field 70 by 50 meters, and you can see here it's a stony bottom. That means that it's full of cavities, channels and pits, and all of the finds were found inside those pits and channels and cavities. So we had to adapt our documentation to deal with those kind of problems on the sites. Here you can see some of the analog methods that we used. So you can see here this a little bit messy part is our analog documentation of the pits. Later you will see why we use it like this. And also, along with analog documentation method, we also used photogrammetric orthomosaics of the same site. And so you can see the pits also on the model. But it was important to know which pit is which. So we had to combine the drawing together with the 3D models and the orthomosaic plans of the site. And that way we get the perfect overlapping of the drawings and the model, and we knew exactly which pit we excavated. And when I say pit, it's similar to a trench. It was hard to make a trench because let's go back a little bit. You can see this stony bottom, and a lot of rocks are sticking out of the ground, and it's hard to make a grid for excavations. So we treated each pit as a separate trench, let's say archaeological trench, and each pit was a separate unit, and we treated all the finds inside those inside the pit as it would be inside of the trench. The next example is Uljeva Cape in Istria. Those are Uljeva shipwrecks on the eastern part of Istria Peninsula. There are 4 shipwrecks on the entrance to the Kuje Bay. This part of the coast is exposed to the sudden and strong wind of Bura that was extremely dangerous for ancient sailors, and those ships were probably trying to enter the bay to hide from the wind. But unfortunately for them, they ended up on the rocks on the entrance of the Kuje Bay on Uljeva Reef. You can see here the strong wind Bura, and this is a photo from the exact location of the site. So you can see here how strong it was. And the ships were trying to enter inside the bay to hide from the wind. A little bit about the site. So there are 4 shipwrecks, as I told already. So Uljeva A is a 2nd century BC and 1st century AD shipwreck. Uljeva B is a 3rd and 3rd to 5th century AD shipwreck, and they are close to each other. You can see the ground is also rocky, full of cavities and pits and so on. Uljeva C, the terrain is practically the same, but the datation is different. So this is the first half of the 17th century. And Uljeva D is a little bit further away, and it's a shipwreck containing Roman roof tiles. Well, we used analog documentation because this method was really good. It was not so fast, but it was precise. So we used a lot of fixed points to get the plan of the site. So you can see here on this side, you can see different drawings of the pits. So again, we didn't use trenches, but we used pits as separate units for excavation. The analog method was after some time completely abandoned because the whole reef was scanned by a multibeam. You can see it here. So the company Harpasi from Slovenia made a multi-beam bathymetry recording of the reef, and you can see here not just the bathymetry lines, but you can also see some pits. This one is a huge pit, but if we zoom in, we would see a lot of smaller pits that are perfectly positioned on the site. And in those small pits are the finds. So you see here, there is nothing here, but only inside the pit. So for us, it was important to know where the exact position of each pit was. Okay, so you can see a lot of the pits here. And the thing that we did is we printed out the bathymetry plan that we get. We printed it on the plate, and then we inspected visually. The diver had to dive on the site and inspect visually to recognize each pit on the plan. So it was easier for us later in the computer to make a plan of the site. Oh, you can see here you can see here for each shipwreck we use the same method. So you can see different pits, and the pit on the plan, you can see it on the plan how it was drawn later. So the documentation of the site was much faster. Also, what we did when we found those archaeological finds, first we were immediately after they came out of the water, we were weighing the finds, and then we were entering the data inside the special spreadsheet. And after we entered the data in the special spreadsheet, we had to divide the finds that were having that could be dated. We divided them from the parts of the belly and other untypological parts, and then we returned those parts back to the sea, and only took the parts that later we could conduct research and papers about it. Okay, so the next example is Zanavin shipwreck in Rivanj Island. It was discovered during the conduction of the survey of Zadar County waters, and it was documented in May and June in 2018. On the site there was an advanced underwater archaeological course conducted by ICWA Zadar. You can see here how the site looks. So it's a Roman shipwreck with a cargo of amphoras. It's dated to 4th to 5th century, and a big part of the site, you can see immediately, is covered by sea grass. You will see later why is it important that the grass is all over the site. First we planned to make a photogrammetry mapping of the site, and we filmed the whole area of the site, but during the processing of the photographs, it was immediately clear that the grass will be a problem. Why? Because majority of the photographs were covered with the grass, but the movement of the grass on the sea current made a big problems for software to process and to make a model. So we had an interruption of the overlapping and the alignment of photos. So we were also using the analog documentation, and for that purpose an offset method was used. With this technique, a site was divided in sectors, and all the finds in each sector were documented in situ position. You can see here the sectors and the drawing of the finds inside those sectors. And later we combined, you can see the orthophoto model of the site. You can see how small portion of the whole site was able to process. So when we overlapped the drawing, analog drawing and documentation of the site together with the digital documentation of the site, we could get a good result and the precise position of each find. So documentation methods are continuously evolving, and the new technologies are implemented in the site excavation and documentation. And most of the sites in Croatia need a dual approach, as you saw already, of the both digital and analog methods to get the best result. Thank you for your attention.
I'm Anita Jelic from the Restoration and Conservation Department. In 2016, the center elaborated the preservation state of two small wooden ships displayed at the Museum of Nin Antiquities. With this study, our big reconservation project on this protection of these two ships started, and this project still lasts. What was done so far will be presented in this presentation. These two small wooden ships were found in 1960s at the entrance of the Nin Bay. At that time, the ships were documented and dated by radioactive carbon analysis. Analysis placed the ships at the late 11th and the early 12th century, or at the early Croatian period. From that period, there are written statements that Croatian fleet at that time was consisted of smaller ships called konduras and larger ships called sagenas. Since the ships found are small, experts believe these ships are konduras. That is why they are also known as Kondura Croatica. Experts also believe the ships were sunk down on purpose, probably to protect the entrance of the bay from the enemy, since they were found without any cargo, only covered with lots of stones on a sandy bottom. The ships were excavated in 1974 by the Archaeological Museum Zadar. Process of dissemination and conservation with polyethylene glycol 4000 followed. After impregnation process, pieces were air-dried and moved to Museum of Nin Antiquities, where they were reassembled in metal cradles. One of the ships as it was found on seabed, another with reconstruction. As a surface protection, they were covered with pigmented polyethylene glycol solution, unknown concentration. Since 1994, the ships are displayed at the Museum of Nin Antiquities. In 2008, reanalysis of the ships took place in collaboration between University of Tel Aviv and University of Zadar. The type of wood was analyzed. The analysis showed the ships were made of hardwood oak. At that time, it was visible that something is happening with these ships because lots of white and yellow powder was falling down from the ship's hulls. So in 2010, emergency conservation intervention was conducted, this time in collaboration of Texas A&M University and University of Zadar. The powder and wood was analyzed, and also the climatic condition in the exhibition room. Since there are no climatic control in the exhibition room, temperature and relative humidity in the room oscillate and depend on external weather conditions, but they should be constant and in control. Analysis of powder and wood show that iron sulfide formed in the wood due to the impact of the seawater on the iron nails used for combined planks with frames. Combination of iron sulfide in the wood, polyethylene glycol as an impregnation substance, and high humidity in the exhibition room is degrading for these ships. To clarify, in condition of high relative humidity, polyethylene glycol attracts humidity from the air, and in this condition, iron sulfide in the wood reacts with oxygen from the air. Hydrated iron salts and acid are produced. Hydrated iron salts are produced in form of powder and cause the physical damage of the wood in form of cracks. Produced acid penetrate in the structure of the wood and cause chemical damage. The recommendation was to establish control environment in the exhibition room with low and constant relative humidity in the air, which will maximum slow down the rate of oxidation reaction and ultimately slow down the degradation of wood. Also, the recommendation was to deacify the wood if it is possible. In 2016, the International Center for Underwater Archaeology in Zadar got permission to elaborate preservation state of the ships and condition in exhibition room. We documented current state of the ships. The ships were completely covered with dust. There were no visible difference between archaeological wood and reconstruction. There were also visible sand, powder, and powder on the hulls and places of previous samplings. We repeated the analysis of the wood and powder to be sure that after 6 years we are still dealing with the same problems. The results of analysis were the same: iron sulfate in wood and hydrated iron sulfate powder. There were still uncontrolled condition exhibition room. According to our study, we stated the reconservation plan, which included the acidification of the wood and guidelines for establishing controlled conditions. And during 2017, we started with our reconservation plan, which is financed by the Ministry of Culture and Media and still lasts. According to previously stated condition of the ships, it is not surprised that the first phase of our reconservation plan was cleaning the dust and removing the surface layer of pigmented polyethylene glycol. We use hot air guns to melt surface polyethylene glycol, spatulas, scalpels, and paper to remove it. Removing the surface polyethylene glycol, we revealed some details that weren't visible before. We revealed the surface of the wood, size and shape of the pieces, difference between archaeological wood and reconstruction. We also revealed pieces of wood used for missing filling parts. We revealed position of iron nails and find out that besides corroded iron nails, there were also 3 nails used for combining planks and with frames. We also revealed some material used in previous conservation process as metal nails, wooden stick, metal wires, wooden wedges, mixture of polyethylene glycol, sand, sawdust, and fiber used for filling the gaps. In this stage of reconservation, our search for opportunities how to deacify the wood led us to do different approaches. First gave Emma Hocker from Mount Vasa Museum in Stockholm. She said we should remove all polyethylene glycol used in previous conservation process. After that, we had to treat the wood with iron chelator solution to remove the iron from the structure of the wood and repeat the conservation process with polyethylene glycol. She also stated the process is long-lasting, expensive, and she wasn't sure in outcome of the procedure. Second opinion gave Sophie Fiero-Mirkovic from Art Nuclear in Grenoble. She visited us and also analyzed ship condition and suggested that we localize acidic area and mechanically remove acidic wood until we reach the neutral area. Control conditions must be established and the ship should be frequently monitored. Since she was sure in outcome of her procedure and our approach was to use less chemical, we decided to follow her guidelines. To localize and remove the acidic wood, we had to dismantle the ships, so first we secured them with thin plastic net and documented previously revealed pieces of wood. We took out each piece of wood, checked for acidic presence by measuring pH of the wood with litmus paper. Simply we apply a drop of ionized water on the surface of the wood and place the litmus paper on the drop of water. Litmus paper changed color in red if wood is acidic. We realized that wood is acidic around the iron nails holes and that acid spread up about 1 centimeter around holes. We mechanically remove all the acidic wood and at the end there were around 300 wider but neutral holes in planking on each ship. The same procedure was carried out with frames, only the frames had acidic cracks instead of holes, and inside cracks there were lots of powder. Cracks in frames were wider and deeper after reaching neutral wood. Altogether, we cleaned 47 frames, 24 from the reconstructed ship and 23 from the ship without reconstruction. We established the different preservation state of these ships. Planking of the reconstructed ship were fragmented. We measure pieces from 3 to 300 centimeters long. Pieces were temporarily secured with plastic wires on the thin polystyrene sheets and placed back on the cradle. Unlike planking, the frames are better preserved. They consist of one or couple of larger pieces which were simply placed back on the planking. Planking of the ship without reconstruction is much better preserved. Only some smaller pieces has to be secured on the polystyrene sheets. But 23 frames are very fragmented, so they were secured with tape, documented, and wrapped with transparent foil to avoid mixing pieces and placed back on planking. We are currently working on reassembling of the ships. We started a reassembling phase with frames of the ship without reconstruction because of their fragmentation, and we are still working on this. After joining the individual frame, we also done the integrations. The reassembling of frames of reconstructed ship and the reassembling of planking on both ships will follow. We accept the biggest problems in reassembling the hull of the reconstructed ship due to many small structural pieces. Our last phase is planned to be toning of integration and cradle modification so we can remove securing net and polystyrene sheets. Reaching the neutral wood, we repeated analysis of wood to check if iron sulfide is still present in the wood. We took samples of neutral wood from different places from both ships. Analysis showed a large amount of iron and sulfur in all samples as an evidence that iron sulfide is still present in the wood. This indicates a high possibility of reappearance of new oxidation products if the necessary control condition and exhibition room are not established. Furthermore, during this risk conservation process, we revealed a gap of 5 cm between planking and frames. We assume this gap is due to unfitting cradles in which the ships are displayed. The cradles were constructed by the measurements taken before excavation, when expansion of the wood due to impact of the seawater and shrinkage of the wood during the drying process was probably overlooked. The decision was to 3D scan the ships and review the present ships' lines. The ships were scanned with handheld 3D scanner in cooperation with VIA Cornell. According to the scanning information, VIA Cornell will present 2D documentation of reconstructed ship. This documentation is still in process. We expect more accurate ship lines and opportunities to display the ships in more fitting and appropriate cradles in the future, which will better present the specific construction of these ships. The specificity of that is that the ship lacked the central keel. Instead of central keel, they had 2 parallel beams on both sides of hulls. This made the bottom of the ships flat and suitable for navigation in shallow waters, as it is in the Bay of Nîmes. This construction also made ships fat and agile, which was essential for war purpose. This part of the ship, the bottom, is not visible to the public in the current way of display. As a conclusion, I would like to point out that conservation process conducted in 1980s was the best way to stabilize the waterlogged wood at that time. The problems related with waterlogged wood in combination with iron and polyethylene glycol as impregnation substance were relieved later. Luckily, our ships are not the only one with this problem. Lots of experts are trying to find the proper solution. There are some solutions, but they are still in experimental phase. Control condition, exhibition room, and frequent monitoring are the only effective solutions so far. That is why we choose approach of removal of excess polyethylene glycol and oxidation products in combination with control condition exhibition room, which can minimize the oxidation rate. Unfortunately, the museum is still trying to maintain the necessary control condition. Since the conditions are unchanged and our latest analysis shows presence of iron sulfide in the wood, the oxidation is still possible and rapid. It won't be surprised if we face with the same problems in the future, and with our approach of removal of oxidation products, we can actually end up with losing this unique cultural heritage. For further more information, feel free to contact us. Thank you for your attention.